all the scholars and philosophy family for this opportunity. And before I come to my team, I would like to tender my greetings to all the people all over the world, and especially to those from philosophy and religion. Today happens to be the birth anniversary of the 10th Sikh Guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, the founder of the Khalsa Panth. And as my greetings to you all today, I wish you Sat Sri Akal, Vaheguru Ji da Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji di Fateh. May truth prevail, may peace prevail, may humanity prevail. The theme I am speaking on today is about terrorism and how we can go about tackling it. And one of the most inspiring persons I heard at one of the international seminars, I think it was in Ahmedabad, was Professor Nayak, that good old teacher of all teachers in Odisha. And he was one of those who advocated spirituality as the tool to tackle terrorism. And I think that was in 2003. At the same time, the same conference, there was one gentleman, a foreigner from Europe, who was talking of the Bhagavad Gita as not entirely a text, or we can say a scripture of peace. I said, no, it allows violence. It allows violence, but he had changed the context altogether. And while going through some of my old papers, I found this handwritten few lines, and there I remembered this after almost 20 years. And I thought, why not I connect that? And that is about what we call the tragic flaw. So my theme is going to be what terrorism actually implies, what is tragic flaw, and why ensuring human rights become fundamental to at least minimize terrorism, or at least to what you call tackle terrorism. That is my theme, and I hope I will have about 40 minutes to talk, and I'll do as much justice I can. The first point is, when you talk of terrorism, are we on our own at all? We talk of freedom of the will. In fact, we are very fond of freedom. But a question that always arises, is this freedom wide enough for us to achieve what we want, or it comes in small packets with limitations and some width that we can stretch it? Sophocles in Oedipus says, I'll come to that in my second section, O light, may I look on you for the last time, damned in the blood he shed with his own hand. This is what Oedipus the king says. And Shakespeare in Julius Caesar writes, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. In other words, there may be something called fatalism, but sometimes we realize that we have missed the boat and we are bound to sink. Either the boat is going to sink, or we who could not take the boat are going to sink wherever we are. Now, I begin with this because we are going to answer this question of freedom a little later. We find terrorism all over the world. In fact, one of the finest, I would say the finest, one of the fine things about terrorism, to call it fine, I put it in quotes, is that most of the youth use indulge in terrorism are more overshadowed by emotions than reason. And they are all frivolous in what they do. That means they fall short of some good goals in life. Or they are frustrated, emotionally weak, and depressed individuals who need an outlet to their emotions. And they want to find some antidote to come out of it, but are maybe unable to. Adolf Hitler, writing in Mein Kampf, says, I quote, "The very first essential for success is a perpetually constant and regular employment of violence." Unquote. What is the difference now between Hitler and now? The only difference is that terrorism has become more technical, sophisticated, and professionally organized, funded and executed mostly by institutions of power, the government. From an ethical point of view, we call an act right or wrong, but there is no way to decide terrorism. There is no way to have a universal standard of terrorism. For me, it means any form of violence. It is organized or unorganized, against or for a group, and targeting individuals, institutions who are totally unwary and innocent. They fall the victims. Philosophically, there are a few questions. How far can a terrorist act be justified? How much validity does his or her ideology have? Is the terrorist a martyr to his cause, or a deranged revolutionary, or a freedom fighter, or is he or she a gangster, a thug on the prowl for helpless victims? I use the word he or she because terrorists have no gender, as we say, they have no religion. Is state terrorism the most comprehensive and organized justified? And if so, to what extent? Is the terrorist a willing and a voluntary agent, a means to justify the goals he has chosen and is therefore meant to serve? Finally, does my ideology give me the right or a license to prevent or hinder others from exercising their codified rights and entitlements? The question is, do we eulogize, tolerate, and promote terrorism, or condemn it and try to get rid of it? The first point that comes to mind is terrorism is not peculiar to our time. It existed in the ancient times as a tactic against incompatible individuals or organizations, to put fear into them and make them compatible with the sponsor of violence. What is of concern today is its nature, kind, and form and depth. The sophistications with which the terrorist can selectively strike at will cannot be possible without the backing and active involvement of state and its agencies. What the terrorist has is accurate intelligence, foolproof planning, dependable technology and communication network, and that will make him, help him to discharge his task very meticulously. And the thing is, he is willing to die in harness, and he is very happy about it. He has no regret about leaving his lone loved ones or others in the lurch. Major Khanduri points out certain facets. Terrorism as a means to overcome ego deficit. A deep hatred of present day society, a sense of loss as far as family, social institutions are concerned, the realization that authority has failed. Philosophy of premeditated violence that justify anything that is done because their goals go beyond personal gains. And there is what we call a crisis of values, frustration with life, not getting from society or the system what is due, and mostly material comforts, etc., and lack of moral scruples in parents and families, teachers and educationists, politicians, officials and leaders who the youth look up to for guidance and direction in life. It is the loss of values, loss of direction in life. War is playing politics by other means, and terrorism is a continuation and a combination of violence by other means. It involves elements of surprise, unpredictability, and impact. It is target specific, the belief that fear phobia can be infused in general community so that the individuals affected by the terrorist act do not feel safe anywhere, anytime. Till the World War, I am talking the Second World War, terrorism was associated only with the crime world for kidnappings, etc. It is the post-Second World War period that we have economic, ethnic, or religious consideration that define the scope and the perimeter of terrorism and the terrorist behavior. Terrorism doesn't have any fixed borders. It is cost effective compared to a full scale war. We can call it a kind of surrogate war, something that is done in installments in different locations at different times, and simultaneously we ourselves in our country are victims of that almost all over the country, and I've been witness to both 1992 and 2008. It is carried out today not by soldiers. It is carried by mercenaries, trained professionals and technocrats, or women and children who are impressionable, who are brainwashed, and are absolutely committed to violent act. We have other forms like chemical warfare, use of nuclear warheads, nuclear waste, napalm, poisoning water bodies and natural food chain, releasing poisonous gases. We had the sarin gas affair in Tokyo some years back, and anything that can cause slow suffering, incapacitation, and finally death. Sometimes we give the name environmentalism. That is, destroy the environment over a period of time. That community will just annihilate itself without a trace. And the last thing that I want to say about this is, today we have got drones that can do the job that even the terrorist doesn't need to do. Terrorism is institutionalized violence. A plan raised an effort to get rid of opposition of any kind and to permeate, using the tool of fear, existing moral, social, religious, political, and cultural fabric of a people. It can be sourced to fundamentalism in the field of politics, religion, education, as well as culture that give rise to fanaticism. Both fundamentalism and fanaticism combine to direct a man's reasoning towards certain motives and goals that mankind in general or particular people may not agree with. The violence of the terrorist differs from that of a murderer or a soldier in terms of intention that guides it. Terrorism aims to grab control of a people and reign over them for political, economic, psychological, military, religious, cultural, racial, ethnic domination that cannot be achieved by rational discourse or on ideological merit. It is tactically sound, it has public visibility and psychological impact. Not all terrorists come from a background in penury or from the world of crime. We today see that most of them come from with high educational qualifications, and some are from reasonably well-to-do families. Today's terrorist is a faceless individual on the rampage, like a wild animal set from a cage after a long time, thoroughly rejoicing and enjoying all that it sees, senses, and tastes. In India, we have a problem, and that is the lack of infrastructure and development in many places in the interiors, and we have socio-economic imbalance, educational imbalance that leads to violence. We term it nationalism, militancy, and so on. But the fact is, ethnism, ratio, all these remain, and they will remain so long as people are not able to benefit from any of the development programs. The terrorist had no respect for himself, and therefore he has no respect for the others. He has a very limited notion of morality, that is his personal morality and with his own standards. He doesn't bother about others' standards about anything. His target are the innocent victims who may not be aware that they're walking into a trap. And the unfortunate part is, they are the ordinary people who are forced to sacrifice, and many times, we do not know. Terrorism includes death as the program of action. When the terrorist can part with his life, he is willing to die. How can we expect to respect the life of others? That calls me to another area of discussion, and that is human rights, which will come to towards the third part. I now come to tragic flaw. It is based on The one Greek playwright Sophocles, and sometime around 430 BC, he had written three plays: Oedipus the king, Antigone, and Oedipus at Colonus. In brief, the story is about Oedipus, uh, who is born and is doomed at the time of birth because of a prophecy. An oracle had said that he will murder his father and marry his mother. And the family tries to keep him, protect him from all this. They keep him away from his father and mother. He is sent to the forest and lives in the forest in the hope that he will overcome his fate because he will never know about it. But life, destiny turns out to be something different. There are five quotations I have chosen from Oedipus. Time which sees all things has found you out. Time and tide wait for no man. At my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and under all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Fear. What has a man got to do with fear? Chance rules our lives, and the future is all unknown. Best live as we may from day to day. Oedipus' Dr. Antigone says, when she prays, beseeches the audience in the play to say, look through all humanity. You will never find a man on earth. If a God leads him on, who can escape his fate? Oedipus, towards the end, exclaims, how terrible to see the truth when the truth is only pain to him who sees. One who has undergone suffering due to fate only knows what fate actually means. I have suffered, friends, the worst horrors on earth, suffered against my will. I swear to God, not a single thing self willed. We find this concept of tragic flaw in Greek and some of the Shakespearean plays. It is about characters who are otherwise excellent people, people of excellent character, excellent conduct, excellent people to live with in their community. But suddenly they put on the reverse gear and then everything goes, downhill with no end in trace. We find it in the case of Oedipus Rex because he becomes so power crazy having got everything, a megalomaniac who realized the futility of his achievements, but the time he realizes it is too late to do penance. We find Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers. They want to escape a friar, with good intentions, want to help them. He gives them a potion, but Juliet sleeps a little longer. Juliet Romeo kills himself, thinking that Juliet is dead. Juliet comes to know and kills herself. Othello trusts Iago, the most villainous of the villains. And he has got Othello's wife, Desdemona, the beautiful Desdemona, have a very fantastic romantic life. And everything down because of Iago, Othello begins to distrust and he questions the fidelity of Desdemona. Julius Caesar is betrayed by his own best friend and lieutenant Brutus. And Brutus tells Mark Antony, not that I love Caesar less, but I love Rome more. In Mahabharata, we have Shokuni, who who influences Dushasan, the greedy Dushasan, to act against Pandav. We have got Kans in Indian mythology, who wants to kill his own nephew, Krishna, because Krishna would have killed him otherwise. That was prophecy. So you will find, there is something of this fate operating even the best of lives. Ravan, one of the most well-read, knowledgeable people, has had to face Lord Ram's army and the Vanars of Hanuman because of his passionate application for Sita. Sometimes we say one should not look upon the neighbor's wife who may look more beautiful. Ravan failed. Excepting Krishna, everyone else is afflicted by attachments and everything. But Krishna has no tragic flaw because he is the supreme lord of the universe. Tragic flaw can be only with human beings, especially man with his afflicted desires, loyalties, goals, circumstances. It is ill luck, inauspicious or plain fate that is determined by his karma of past life or consequential to those in his present life. Ordinary mortals have just no choice except to go with fate, good or bad. In that sense, we are both victims as well as contributors, individually and collectively, with or without our knowledge, to the existence and sustenance of terrorism. Is violence of any form so simplistic to explain? It is more towards escapism. Patriotism may be useful to a very limited set of actions, and that too within a limited range, but that cannot justify wanton violence of any form on any entity. Everyone is born with some preordained virtues and vices, with a lacuna of some kind, and only its range differs according to circumstances and environment of individuals. This lacuna dominates and overwhelms our consciousness, our thought process, our logic, our motives, goals, and intentions. Our role is fixed in the tragic play of life, and we just go on acting our role, enjoying it, suffering it, and fading quietly or living painfully after a pleasurable life and encountering and consciously enduring a violent death, mostly self chosen and self inflicted, with the knowledge that we are that subject. We are that subject. The issues before us are: is the terrorist a tragic hero, star-crossed, or just guided by his own choice of extreme absolute madness to indulge in mayhem? Is freedom of thought is freedom of thought also a matter of one's fate? Is terrorism the consequence of destiny or a search for identity by someone whose moral mooring is nil or unstable, doubtful? Is his conduct to be justified or condemned due to his individual psychological makeup? What happens then to the universality of moral laws? Can moral laws be categorical imperatives? Socrates said, "Know thyself," to live a life of reason. Plato advocated to live virtuously based on knowledge of ideas, to live as dedicated and loyal citizens of the state, with the vision of truth and the good. But how many would be comfortable and willing to come out of the dark cave and face the brightness outside? Aristotle advocated eudaimonism and perfection as the ultimate goal of life. What we find is, in Greek tragedies, Aeneas and Shakespeare, we find the tragic heroes meeting their nadir, the lowest point, due to mostly ignorance, unrestricted ambition, power, vanity, and pride. Man has changed, surely, but some such human elements still remain. Now, I'll answer this particular issue with only three examples. One is from the Bhagavad Gita, the other is about Oedipus, and the third from the terrorist. In the Bhagavad Gita, we have got this concept of the three gunas. It is there in the other systems also, but the three gunas have a balance. It is only when there is an imbalance that there is a confusion between disposition and false passion, because the overpowering of one guna over the others. Is there a way out? The Gita suggests Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga that will be applicable to any individual, despite the fact that he faces this tragic flaw. But there is some remedy available. As far as Arjuna is concerned, the vision of Krishna as the Lord of the universe and Arjuna's total surrender to the Lord as the designer architect of the universe and Arjuna's submission to Lord Krishna as his H capital agent. The terrorist lacks both reason, as Plato suggests, and submission to the divine other than his own private conception and doesn't want a challenge to his limited vision or overcome its deficiencies. The result is analogical to the choice the tragic hero makes to deal with his fate. Oedipus remains a mere mortal, realizing the futility of his existence despite being a royal, a king. It makes no sense to him to live after realizing his errors of judgment. His self correcting penitence and conduct thereafter is weighted towards a moral redemption of his terminal tragic flaw. It's a kind of jnana marga in a limited sense, very limited sense. But he doesn't have enough time to reignite the nobility of his soul. Fate has terrible power. You cannot escape it by wealth or war. No fort will keep it out. No ships outrun it. It is too late to recompense any form in any form because life has its limitations. It has, in terms of time and opportunities to move from myself in quote to self-awareness to self-knowledge. His realizational tragic flaw leads him to partial self-knowledge, but no farther, because, like the Greeks of his time, he was entirely conditioned by the fate that cannot be challenged by mortals. Arjuna becomes a superman, realizing his station and his duties as a matter of divine injunction, and chooses to go ahead as a warrior with a clear mind, doing what he should do with his enemy, and that is without desire. His conduct is weighted towards religious as well as a spiritual self-awakening of his own being and function in his earthly journey. It is the ultimate result of Jnana Marga, Karma Marga, and Bhakti Marga supplementing one another. His redemption is free from any sense of guilt that made him confused and ambivalent till Krishna raised him with his Vishwarup Darshan. The nobility of his soul survives throughout the war because he is not killing because he is just feeling like doing so. It is a duty cast on him by God. This is not just symbolic, it is a manifestation of perfect self knowledge going beyond both religious and spiritual self awakening. Nietzsche says, he who has a why to live can bear almost any hell. He also says, free will without fate is no more conceivable than spirit without matter, good without evil. Arjuna's is a classic example of free will overruling fate. The terrorist has a weird sense of both righteousness and ideology, with nothing good to show. The terrorist doesn't die, he kills or gets killed by himself or by any other, with his goals beyond his reach and dream and desire of his ideal society or heaven for that matter, lying in tatters. He achieves nothing worthwhile other than a few months' sadistic pleasure or glory. His conduct has nothing of karma as per his colonized, opinionated mind, and nothing worthwhile in terms of jnana or bhakti. His desire to be killed before his death is due because of his condition, character, and identity. Fate or no fate, it doesn't matter. And who cares if it did? He cannot ever overcome his frailties because his soul has turned ignoble. To a fatalist who is positive, fate offers at least a break, a chance to grow wiser, stronger, and kinder, transform life towards the good. A thing does not necessarily be good or considered good, uh, or as truth for that matter, because someone dies or kills for it. Arjuna understands this, terrorist doesn't. Fatalism as a working principle without admitting its absolute veracity and tragic flaw. if at all it is there, can be either neutralized or minimized for its consequences if a person wants to. Carl Jung had said, I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become. All that is, you'll find that Arjuna, Oedipus, and the terrorists, each one choose to become what they are, but the realization that they made the wrong choice comes much, much later. All that is needed is a right philosophy, not merely a misplaced ideology, however seemingly powerful, and a reasonable moral personal culture that reigns throughout one's life, coupled with a benevolent altruistic mindset. Be human, be humane. After all, a belief in fate doesn't mean you cut off your head. A belief in fate doesn't mean you cut off your head because of a headache or chop off a limb because its movement is painful. Jawaharlal Nehru had said, life is a game of cards. The hand you are dealt is determinism. The way you play it is free will. Move from being a mere person in the custody of a false glory, bestowed by some unknown power or force, to be an active, reasoning individual in the realm of one's own spiritually developed conscience. I come to the third part now, and that is the hope of the future. If you have some hope of overcoming terrorism, I think we have to make sure that human rights are fully protected, human rights are respected, human rights are supported by not only each individual in society, it should be supported by the government, the institutions in society. A right is given to a human being to enable him to become a complete person. The ideals of non-violence, human dignity, and social harmony are non-negotiable. A person's personhood, personality, character, intellectual, physical capacities, these all get scope and opportunities to develop and articulate on the foundation of the rights that are bestowed on him. This needs the sanction of the community and sanitary conditions and a system of public governance which allows it to sustain itself. No society can progress unless there is security and stability in society. And it is only this security and stability in society that can ensure the rights are actually working. There are two interlinked values to human rights, and that is, I'm sorry, my throat is going bad. Life, respect for life, that is life and freedom. And these will be protected. If we fail in this, I think we are inviting trouble. It's not only political rights I'm talking of, it is right as far as communities, take every aspect of life is concerned. And whenever we talk of rights, exercising our rights, it must be done without fear. It must be done without hindrance. It must be done in such a way that I get full support from the establishment to achieve the purpose of those rights. And of all these, the most important one is the right to life. Just as Rajendra Sachar says in one of his books, these are the rights that help us to bring up children and oneself in a decent, healthy environment and to have the maximum conditions of good health. That means healthy environment, good health, and good education. Let us ensure that these rights are given to all. The other economic rights वगैरह will automatically follow, and that's the only way society can progress. Equality before law, a rational secular approach to issues that affect human existence. The worst form of terrorism is not the one for economic or commercial goals as in the past. It is the way cultural and religious prejudices are induced in impressionable minds of the youth that matter, for it turns them into mercenaries who have no value for their own lives or that of others. No doctrine of justice or religion matters to a terrorist, except his own. Justice as a value as well as a covenant is meant to give equal opportunities in ideal conditions to every individual to live a full and a good life as is humanly possible. Both man as well as nature are creative and man represents identification of one's life, oneself with all forms of creation, living and non-living. Man is also part of nature and cannot escape nature's universal power. Enriching all forms of life as nature does is also a bounden duty cast on man. Nature has everything to support life, man only needs to share it with all forms of life. This knowledge is crucial to neutralize terrorism. Will the terrorists recognize or agree with this identity between man and nature? I will overlook some of my other points here because I am raising its time now. Skepticism, cynicism, frustration, depression, unfounded prejudices, and fear phobia can be overcome only by reverting the mind to a spiritual plane. This is possible only by building a stable character, along with widening intellectual horizon throughout one's life with a bouquet of meaningful personal interests that balance with purposeful social national objective, definitely not to indulge in wanton killing and plunder. Fanatics of all hues all over the world suffer from ill-equipped minds, mental deficiency, or illogical axioms that manifest unbridled violence. When the victim, whether right or wrong, is helpless due to his or her physical or mental shortcomings, a mob or a group needs collective wisdom or ignorance and strength doesn't recognize its own duty or others' rights. When sentiments, emotions take center stage, it is excellent fodder for the hopeless, without work netas, to fuel and stoke the smoldering pent-up embers within the unwary masses who just need an outlet. When people go blind, Tagore had said, the one with only a little hazy sight and that too only in one eye becomes their king. Such leaders become the lawmakers and make an ass of it. People forget the price of freedom and the opportunity of peddling it faithfully and usefully for progress and prosperity. That is an act of sacrilege or exploitation by whosoever cannot be condoned. Let the independent judiciary decide it. The big question is who builds the evidence and presents it faithfully. Our hope entirely rests on a system of efficient system of jurisprudence and competency in public administration. It is still within our mind to ensure that these systems work. Dr. Wilson Tambur, the former principal of St. Stephen's, New Delhi, in one of his blogs in Times of India about 1 year back, had used Heisenberg's from physics, the example is from physics, uncertainty principle to deal with religious fanaticism. Fundamentally, I think that can be used at all levels. When I make this into an article, it will be there in the full text I am going to quote. He says, when science, which comes closest to certainty as far as the way the world exists and works is concerned, adopts the uncertainty principle, which says that whatever is there in the world, like Buddhist says, is changing all the time. There is nothing absolutely fixed and true and absolutely certain at any given moment. How can we be so adamant about our claims that I alone am right and nothing else is? My views only are certain and nothing else is. The day we realize the uncertainty or the possibility of uncertainty or the probability of uncertainty of our own beliefs, our own doctrines, our own isms, There's that will be the moment when we will stop violence. At least we will not kill others. We will try to discourse. What I try to do is analyze the thin line that divides terrorism from other criminal acts and show that terrorism is a well-orchestrated attempt by government as well as institution who follow a particular ideology of faith to trample on others' rights and force others to accept or fall in line or to succumb. A war begins and ends with its casualties on and off the battlefields, but terrorism continues even after the terrorist is dead. Do we have the wherewithal to tackle this in today's time? My answer is yes. Let us look upon mankind as an end in itself and not as a means, and let us not indulge others who are willing to die and lead them to their death. We need to be open minded, scientific, adaptable, progressive, rational, secular, without being irreligious. Let us not let, especially the youth, let us not lead them to believe that the blinking lights on the top higher floors of the skyscrapers are the real stars. Let them not be carried away by illusions. Let us not let our children, let our youth go the wrong way because it is easy to follow. Let us try to make them spiritual and adopt spirituality as a tool. Sorry, yes, spirituality, once it becomes a habit, then it becomes easy. It will enable them to be humane. The terrorist may not choose it, but I can say Arjuna chose it. He accepted divine command and chose it. Frederick Lentz says, with free will we can modify to a certain extent the chain of karma that has been set in motion by the karma of the previous movement. That is, what free will really is, the ability to alter the sequence of karmic fate. The only option for us is to restore spirituality as a primary tool in human consciousness. Spirituality will help mankind reorient and reinvent itself as an ethical personality, a social and political morality, a culture of civility and service, and reverence to nature and mankind. Some teachers metaphorically advise students to take wings like an eagle and to soar high. Let me add, let spirituality be the wind below the wings to energize and guide the flight path to make them humane and responsible adults. I will end with two quotes, one by Henry Longfellow from the Psalm of Life, and that says, trust no future, just 2 minutes more. Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury the dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime and departing leave behind us footprints and the sands of time. Let us then be up and doing with a heart for any fate. I repeat, let us be up and doing with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still perceiving, learn to labor and to wait. There are no easy ways to achieve difficult things in life. There is a Zen prayer which one of my wife's friends gave her, a poster. I just photocopied that. It says, watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, they become destiny. Thank you. Have a nice evening.
Thanks so much, Professor Seshadri, for your thought-provoking and comprehensive talk. on this scheduled topic. Said at first you have made it very clear that how terrorism has become a common phenomenon of the globe, and you have mentioned that the terrorists are the voluntary agents in the crime world, and who have direct impact on human rights with devastating consequences to life, liberty, and physical integrity. You have reflected on the terrorist activities of the globe and India, Indian society, both in the Puranic culture and present time. You have taken the examples of King Oedipus, how it is a symbol of moral degradation, a source of suffering, violence, and moral conflicts and moral degradation. You have taken the characters in Mahabharata, in the Ramayana, to reflect upon the instances of the tragic flow, and you have made a very beautiful causal connection between injustice and terrorism. At last, you have given the hope of the future by upliftment of the human consciousness and spirituality. Thanks so much, sir. Now over to Dr. Rao for moderating the interactive session.
Namaskar and thank you, Dr. Maharana. I should thank Professor Seshadri for a beautiful talk. Well, it has been synopsized by Dr. Maharana. Well, I request the audience, if they have any queries or any suggestions to make or any observations to make, they are welcome. Well, we have with us Ranjit Ghosh sir. Well, I request him, because there is no question in the chat box. I requested Professor Ghosh to comment on this.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I must congratulate Professor Seshadri for giving a new direction to, he has tried, of course, to give a new direction to terrorism. Now, I am afraid...
Sir, I have not given a new direction to terrorism.
Let me finish, sir. The thing is, when you are saying that no injustice, no terrorism, you are bringing, and for that you are bringing Sophocles and Bhagavad Gita and all these things. I think it is no injustice, no violence. And then, because the tragic flaw theory that is used by the Oedipus or Arjuna, and all these things, the Sophocles, Oedipus, against nature, against God, against the fate, all these things, those things are, they are the concept violence suits, not terrorism. Because in your last part, in section third, which you have mentioned, there you have mentioned very beautifully about the terrorism, about the violation of human rights, about all these things. But the tragic flaw theory, how it can be, because you see the literal explanation of violence is different from the political explanation of violence, for which we discuss terrorism. Because the concept terrorism, the very theory of terrorism that is based on violence is different from the literary work of Sophocles and also Bhagavad Gita. So how do you respond to this? Thank you.
No, I am aware of this. That's why, in the very beginning, I made a submission that for me, terrorism is any act of violence. I had made that statement. I didn't specifically go according to the ancient Greek concept of violence or the modern political violence, that is why ethnic violence that is going on. I used it to mean any form of violence, any kind of violence that directly impacts or affects innocent people. I have not mentioned only violence. I say any form of violence. Terrorism is any form of violence that is against innocents who are not party to that particular act or the violence. For example, there is violence in war, but it is limited only to that for a limited goal. But in the case of terrorism, it is violence that is just beyond the scope of any other consideration. It is killing for the sake of killing. Even criminals do that, but they have a limited goal there. So I have not restricted the meaning of terrorism as something different from violence. I have used it to mean violence of any kind. For example, we have got domestic violence, we have got economic violence, we have got social violence. For me, all that is irrational. All that is irrational. We have got violence even in campuses. Ragging, for example, is also a form of violence, physical as well as emotional, psychological violence. Harassing the downtrodden, harassing people who are differently able is something that we see in our life. And that also, for me, anyone, someone who is better endowed, better able, exploits anyone who is not as lucky as he is for me terrorism. That's how I mentioned that. I did elaborate because of paucity of time. Violence of any kind, parents, bullying their children, siblings bullying their younger ones, that also I consider as terrorism, because that directly affects human dignity, the dignity of those who are affected, and they are helpless. That's what I mean by terrorism.
Normally, what we do that in you are talking about war and violence, but when the question of terrorism comes, it is a proxy war. So in the political field, we take it as a proxy war that is fought against the enemy states for their own self-aggrandizement. So all these things are there in the question of terrorism. That is, it is for that reason. Terrorism is the result. The modern discussion of terrorism, it gives us this direction that it is a misguided nationalism and it is also a misdirected internationalism. So because it's a challenge to the liberal democracy and the human rights and all these things are there, and that is what the terrorists used to do. But in that connection, actually, what you are trying to refer as the tragic flaw theory. So I could not just relate, and that's why I am asking you about this thing. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Noted. Your point is noted. I'll try to elaborate on that in my final paper. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ghosh, and also thank Professor Seshadri. But I don't know whether I would be right saying this. When Professor Seshadri, sir, when you say that any form of violence is terrorism, somehow I think it doesn't go to my mind actually, because if you say any form of violence is terrorism, so if the domestic violence, any form of civil violence, you call that terrorism, somehow there is a category mistake, I think.
You have finished your question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. My answer is.
Hello.
When we talk of. Hello. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Hello?
My answer is.
Sir, Krishnamurthy sir, one second, sir. After Seshadri sir response, then you will be asked, sir. Krishnamurthy sir, 1 minute, sir. Krishnamurthy sir, 1 minute, please mute, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. See, your question was, how can domestic violence be called terrorism? You see, when there are two people who are not equal, and the stronger one uses any form of force on the other, whether physical, psychological, emotional force, where that person's, the victim's human dignity, self-worth is affected. For me, I call it terrorism. Because the one who is a victim will have no way to defend himself. There is no way he can defend himself. That's why I'm using it like that. I have not taken it only in the case of political violence. It is there, religious violence. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that if there are two equals, there is no question of exploitation. They will fight till the end. Here, the one who is the victim is just plain helpless. And therefore, I consider the other one, the stronger party, as a terrorist. It is like I said, like a wild animal that is left free from cage after a long time. And what it does, enjoying the freedom. I think man should not be behaving like that. Both in 92 and here in 2008, just a couple of days before I retired, we had this violence in Mumbai bomb blast, and we know what happened. People were killed at the railway station. They were all ordinary people waiting to go to their native places. And how many of them did? There are police officers, policemen who died. I mean, they are not willing people who just walked into their trap. Unfortunately. But the terrorists are armed and we had ordinary policemen moving with lathis. What I'm trying to say is, where any form of violence, whichever way, impinges or affects the rights, dignity of an individual, the human element of an individual, I call it as terrorism. That is my submission. I have taken that stand. I hope I have clarified.
Okay, so your idea of terrorism is encompassing all forms of violence.
Yeah.
So if you take that, then it is okay. Well,
Yeah.
Krishnamurthy sir wants to say something. Well, he has unmuted. Some sort of noise is coming from his side. Sir, Krishnamurthy sir, you want to ask something? Srinivasan, Krishnamurthy sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
One second. I have mentioned we have more of internal terrorism than external terrorism, especially in Kashmir. What is your take on it? And also, hello, are you able to hear me, sir? Hello, are you able to hear me?
Continue, sir. Yes.
Okay. Where does India stand in the global terrorism statistics?
I will not be able to comment on that because that is not my topic, and as far as statistics is concerned,
No. I'm sorry, you have mentioned no injustice and no terrorism. That means if there is injustice, there is bound to be a terrorism. In this case, we have a regional agenda in India, within India, and we are being terrorized by the group of people than externally. That is what is perplexing. Recently, in Kerala, you must have read that during the New Year Eve, around 1,000 to 2,000 Bihari migrants have indulged in, kind of terrorism, and especially towards the Muslims and the Hindus. This kind of terrorism has been organized by a group of, in the olden days, you call them as warlords or zamindars, like that. So, what is your take on that?
That is going beyond the scope of my paper, but my only take on that is
terrorism is well within the...
See, my only answer is a very brief submission I'll make, a response to your point, and that is if politicians of our country, the kind of leaders we make of them, we elect, and that's a very unfortunate part that many of our people, especially the educated intellectuals, they don't come out and vote. And the way we as a people, we have allowed infiltrators to come from other states like Bangladesh, Myanmar, and elsewhere. They have colonized many areas in our country, many localities in our country, with tacit government support, irrespective of the political parties, and at least the present government is taking some action to stop that. but it is going to take time. But I believe, yes, others have opened their eyes, and we'll have to wait for some more time to see the results. But so long as politicians play this mischief, I think we have to keep our fingers crossed. I cannot say too much.
Excuse me. Thank you, but unfortunately, the injustice done to the, as I read your topic, is that it is not only due to injustice, but also due to poverty, unemployment, lack of education,
Yes,
and drugging and alcoholism.
I mentioned that we have, in India, the problem is because of lack of development. It is deficient infrastructure. I mentioned that, and lack of health and education facilities. I've made a statement. I don't know whether you were able to hear me when I made that statement. That's the only way we can do that. So we need to have even Professor Alok Tandon, I think, is there. I have made this point earlier. We have to make quality education free, right, for every child in India, every Indian citizen I'm talking of, right from primary till higher secondary, and if possible, right up to degree level. High quality education.
I'm sorry to interfere here. You would have read recently a declaration by the Prime Minister that every Indian will be provided with a house. Will we, in the same tone, will he declare that every Indian will be educated? That would have been more appropriate, isn't it?
Yes, I will not deny what you say. Let us give them health, food and education. The country will take care of itself.
Okay, we hope for the best. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishnamurthy sir and Professor Seshadri for the response. Well, Krishnamurthy sir, please mute your microphone. Please.
Okay.
I will think
sorry.
No problem, sir. No issue. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Krishnamurthy sir and Professor Seshadri for the response. Well, I have a beautiful question in the chat box, and that would be the last question for this session. Maybe if somebody wants, they can ask. But it's a good question I feel from by Shravani Mishra.
Yeah.
Maybe she has a take from the Kashmir issue. Maybe what she wants to say is, in spite of the efforts by the government to bring the people to the mainstream, there is a lot of hue and cry from various quarters. Actually, there is an internal problem, and the government is trying hard to bring the people who have gone wayward to the mainstream. But still, why are the questions being raised? Why a lot of hue and cry is there? And how do you see this problem?
See, the problem is, so long as they look upon the people of the country as merely vote banks, and to somehow manage to survive, to be in power for 5 years or so, and then do something next, I think nothing will happen. But the most important thing is, being spiritual or inculcating spirituality doesn't mean only yoga. Yoga is good, definitely, as something that will keep your body and mind fit. But that's not the only thing. Spirituality is basically psychological training, emotional training, intellectual training, and spiritual training at the end. Religion will vary from everyone, but the way the religious process works in the human heart, that has to change, and that is only done with humanism. We are got to have humanistic training right from childhood, and that should go on till we have become at least graduates. Spiritual training is something that once it is inculcated, that quality is there in us, that capacity is there in us, it will go on throughout our life. It is not something that we pass an exam with. Spirituality is not something, that can give me a degree or anything. It is something that my consciousness develops the capacity to always think beyond itself, to consider things beyond itself. And I think that is possible, at least the beginning has been made. But then, as I said, the difficult part is not what politicians want. Because for them, their own survival is what it counts. It is not what is good for the people ultimately. At least they have got one prime minister in this country now who thinks good about the country, whatever others may say. I'll agree. I may not agree with BJP. I may not agree with Shiv Sena or Congress. But definitely, Congress had stalwarts who played a vital role post-independence period. That's why we have got IITs and all other things. The fact is, we have to redeem ourselves only by proper education. And yes, in what you call the imbeciles will make noise about it, because that is going to affect them. Naxalites don't want development because Naxalism will die. That feeds so many others in power. So the same way, we have to take it right from childhood, at least in the schools. And here I think parents and families have also a vital role to play in spiritualizing the human mind. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Apart from the spiritual thread in your response, one thing comes to the fore, that we have been grooming politicians, but not real sense leaders. That has been the real crisis of all the issues.
No, we lack leaders, competent leaders.
We are grooming, yes, sir. We are grooming politicians, but not the real sense leaders.
Yeah.
So that's the crisis.
Yeah.
So because a politician thinks of his next term or being in power, so he doesn't have a comprehensive vision to think of the future or the present. He is concerned about his own administration or about his own power. So that's how we are grooming politicians and not real sense leaders. And that is the true crisis. And that is the root cause of all sorts of problems, not in India, the worldwide. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. Very nicely responded, sir. And it's a good take from you, sir. We are grooming politicians, but not leaders.
Dr. Rao, just one thing I want to mention in this connection, leaving aside these case studies on different parts of India, we can bring Noam Chomsky's article 9/11, where he says that men are mostly guided by two things. One is rationality, and the other one is their attachment to the community and religion. So these days, what is found, that we are suffering because of the minimization of rationality and maximization of our attachment to religion and community. And that is actually the result behind all these things. And then you bring the Kashmir Pandits issue, or you bring the Kerala issues, all those things will fit in due to these things, the minimization of rationality and the maximization of the religion affinity to one's extreme affinity to one's community and religion. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Professor Ghosh, for your observation on this. Well, if anybody, any participant, if he has something in mind to raise, they are welcome. We have with us a number of participants. We have with us Dr. Kailas Das, sir, and others.
We have to move to the second session.
Okay, let us move. Okay. It's time for the second session. So let us end up the interactive session now.
Okay.
Next session. Over to Dr. Maharana.
Okay, thanks so much, Professor